Good afternoon. How are you today? Well, it's 80 something, so I get my wishes. And it's kind of a quiet in the wind. There is none. And the sun is out, so it's a great day. I spent some time away from my books on a meeting of the Soil and Water Board. It's a local position I hold. And I did it because I'm concerned about what we're doing to preserve and maintain our water and our soil. You know, it takes 1,000 years for this topsoil to be created, and to just blow it away or to waste it, it's a sin. And we need water. We're mostly water. And if we don't drink water, when you see dehydrated, if you visit a doctor for a checkup and they see dehydrated, it means you're not drinking enough water to keep your kidneys working well. So the reason I'm on this kick today, more than maybe normal, is you're familiar with the dispute about the Colorado River, but it's been losing water, and water has been used. The combination of drought and overuse of the water has put it in a dangerous state to sustain California, Nevada, and Arizona. And those of you who are in Colorado or near those places in our marvelous nation are aware of the fact that things are treated the way you treat minerals in Colorado, and that includes water. Years back, I thought it might be interesting to get off the grid, but you know, the prospect of that as you grow older is perhaps not a good idea. But you know, I don't know. There was a woman in her 70s that I met there, and she was having water brought into her, and she was using generators for heat and light, and she had quite a good system. It's not as precarious as it sounds as I describe it. The winds were terrible there. It was near Santa Fe, New Mexico, on the Colorado side. There's a great canyon, and there's a place where a lot of people do live, and they've encouraged them to live there. But one of the big problems is water. You may have heard of the tragedy of the commons. Well, it can dictate rules because it fails, and I'll explain what I mean. In Colorado, for instance, when the water came down, you might think, well, I'll capture the rainwater. But it was a misdemeanor years ago if you did that. If you intercepted the rain coming from the sky to the ground, rather than letting it go through the earth into the aquifers that were shared. And so they literally could arrest you. And that's changed since. I don't know if there's a fine or something, but it's a practice that they discourage. And I suppose you can go through all sorts of hoops to make it less obvious. In other words, violate the law. But that's the problem out there in Colorado. But the problem presently is we can't get these three states, California, Nevada, and Arizona, to agree about how to ration the water, where to give it. And the farmers think they should be first on that list. Now, returning to the notion of the tragedy of the commons. It actually goes back to Aristotle. I mean, he wrote about it. And he wrote about basically how selfish practices will be preferred over the common good. Now, years later, there have been people who've written about it. William Lloyd, I think he was the first to use the metaphor of the commons. And I always think of Boston. They were thinking, I believe, in England. But in Boston, there's this marvelous commons. And imagine how you could graze your cattle there. And then more and more come into the area and they graze. And then finally, there's nothing to graze. Too many cattle, too much grazing, too many people, no rationing, no sensible way to handle it. And so that's the tragedy of the commons. that people take care of their self-interest rather than what works for the common. And that's what we have with the Colorado River. Now, the administration, that is the Biden administration, has said they're going to intervene and they're going to work out a rationing system for the states. Well, I'm not going to get into what the constitutional issues are there, but it's a very serious problem, because what's happening with the Colorado River, and may happen again in the West, where we've had our biggest droughts, I suppose, we're going to have to deal with this again and again, because the problem with water is not going to stop. Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State, who lived not far from me in Loudoun County, and made herself available for all sorts of meetings and stuff like that. And I got to know her a little bit. And I did talk to her about water. And she said that water is the oil of this century, meaning the tragedy of fuel, oil, and how it was going to be used and distributed. That was the challenge of the last century. In this century, the challenge is, what are we going to do to preserve water, to have drinkable water, meaning quality water, and how are we going to share worldwide, really? There are already people suffering. More will suffer. So I point that out for those of you who are tree huggers, and this has been obvious forever. It's nothing new. But in America now, we seem to, well, I was going to say share less, but I feel a bond with many more people than I did years ago as the crises have manifest, meaning those people that are out for themselves, that don't see a common good, don't care to help others. It's all me, me, me. And we do have an identity, and that is something we have to deal with. And we may extend our personal identity. What about our family? What about our neighbors and so forth? But how do you make a decision that helps everyone? And so I think it's going to be interesting to watch what happens with the Colorado River and how they settle this, because this is just a warm-up for many more of these kinds of problem solving. Can we overcome the tragedy of the commons? Well, not without rules, not without compromising, and that's the challenge. At a time when people don't want to compromise, they're happy being mad at each other and angry with each other. And it's worse than that, because people just lie about it. They'll say, oh, there's no problem with the river. It's obvious, you can just look at it. It's sort of like those people who say, what are you talking about? Why do we worry about glaciers melting in Antarctica? Because it's coming to your neighborhood real soon. And it's coming in various ways, even if you don't live on the coastline. So that's one thing. The second thing that I think is worth talking about, and I don't want to go in things we've already talked about before, and you probably share that view. I mean, breaking news is breaking when it happens. It has broken. I'm awoke to the broken news after, it happens. And developments that we follow afterwards, that's important. But we beat a horse to death, it seems to me. But the violence is a thing that we beat to death in a strange way. We give emotionalism and hand-wringing, and by now the praise that people make fun of, thoughts and prayers. But what do we do? And I'll give it to Biden. He's restated his position about assault rifles. And that's obviously one answer. Plainly, we have too many Americans who are either fragile, have mental health problems, have lots of anger or suffering or isolated. And then those people quite conscious who embrace evil and hate and pain for others and for themselves. In this category, I think it's an interesting phenomenon. In Idaho, the governor has decided, hey, Why don't we bring back the marksman and shoot people instead of hanging them or giving them drugs or any of the other things we could do? And those of us who have animals and have had to put down one animal or another, we don't have to give a cocktail of three. They don't have to give a cocktail of three. But I go back of that. This is an alien discussion to me, because my first question is, why are we doing this in such an imperfect system that we get wrong, and invoking an action that we say we condemn among people and among civilized peoples? Put that aside. For those who want to go around killing people for crimes maybe they didn't commit, or maybe it wasn't as severe, or they weren't the trigger men, or that the person is mentally challenged in a way that they can't appreciate the wrongfulness of their conduct. As we keep rewriting the laws for these things to make it easier to convict someone who maybe can't appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct. Okay, so that aside, we're going to stand up with or without a mask and shoot at the heart of a person 20 feet away. Well, that's interesting. What if we required that they strangle the person to death? That somebody pick a short straw and everybody'd stand around while he went and choked the person to death. Oh yeah, and I think you should tie his hands and legs so that he can't fight back. Because when you shoot him, he can't run away. When you give him drugs, he's on a table in a sealed room. When you hang him, he doesn't get much chance there either. So America has got this leaning into the violence in public proceedings, and its tolerance of shooting children and innocents without notice by people who should never have a gun. And the answer is, no one in civilized society should have an assault rifle. You don't shoot squirrels with an assault rifle. Well, some of these assholes probably do. So there are a couple of things that I think are entwined in these two examples. One is America needs more participation as equals, less selfishness, and I mean extreme selfishness. Yes, take care of yourself. But what about water for all these other people? How do you ration it? When you've been overusing it like it's an infinite resource, which it's not. And what do we do about violence in society? Do we serve our society by having more examples of hideous, brutal violence executed by the government itself as an example to everyone else? Terrible. So, I do see the activity we've had among the public as a good sign that people get it. We the people get it. Our leaders are slow to follow. But what's happening in Tennessee, and what's happening with abortion, what's happening with Trump, all these things are vectors that favor a path toward civilization. And so that's where we have to look. We can be encouraged by those things. So I am on my 80-degree cathedral of trees, and we welcome you, and I'll hope to see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.